Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel deep into the frozen heart of the Pacific Northwest, through forgotten corners, isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing true horror stories ever recorded from this unforgiving region. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people who lived through horrors they can never forget. From abandoned logging roads to rain-soaked forests, from basements hiding secrets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight, you will hear horrors that should never exist. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the Pacific Northwest, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Evan Mercer, and this happened when I was 26 during the fall of 2019, while working as a freelance wildlife photographer in Washington State. I'd come to the Pacific Northwest chasing isolation. Silence helped me think. Forests didn't ask questions. Olympic National Forest felt endless. Miles of towering trees, moss-drenched ground, and a constant gray drizzle that never quite turned into rain. Locals warned me not to wander too deep alone. I smiled, nodded, and ignored them. I'd been alone in harsher places. The first night, I camped near an old trail that barely appeared on my map. No cell signal, no other hikers. Just wind pushing through branches, like slow breathing. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Not animals, not random movement. Footsteps, measured, deliberate, circling my tent. I held my breath, hand on my flashlight, telling myself it was paranoia. Then something brushed the fabric of the tent from the outside. Whatever was out there was standing upright. I didn't scream. I don't know why. Maybe fear squeezed the sound out of me. I slowly reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The light cut through the thin tent walls, casting a warped shadow outside. The shape was wrong. Too tall. Arms hanging too low. Its head tilted as if it were studying the glow. Then it stepped back. I unzipped the tent just an inch, heart hammering so hard I thought it would give me away. The forest was empty. No movement. No sound. Just the steady drip of water from leaves. I told myself it was over, that my mind had filled in gaps the dark created. But sleep never came. Just before dawn, I found footprints circling my campsite. Bare. Human-shaped but stretched, as if whoever made them had feet far longer than any person should. Each print pressed deep into the mud, like the thing weighed far more than it should. And leading away from the camp. They didn't go into the forest. They went toward the trail I planned to hike next. I should have packed up and left that morning. Every instinct screamed at me to go. But stubbornness is a quiet killer, and I convinced myself fear had exaggerated everything. I told myself I was a professional, not some weekend camper spooked by shadows. I followed the trail anyway. The forest felt different in daylight, still silent but heavier, like something was pressing down from above. The air smelled metallic, damp, wrong. After about an hour, I realized something unsettling. The sounds of wildlife were gone. No birds, no insects, just my boots crunching softly against gravel and moss. That's when I noticed the footsteps again. They weren't fresh, but they followed the trail parallel to mine, never crossing it. Always just off to the side, half hidden beneath ferns and wet leaves. Like whatever made them didn't want to be seen clearly. I sped up. The footsteps matched my pace. When I stopped, the forest stopped breathing with me. That's when I heard it whisper my name. Low, broken, and too close. I froze. My name wasn't shouted or spoken clearly. It was mimicked, stretched, like someone who had only heard it once and practiced saying it wrong. My mouth went dry as I slowly turned in a full circle. Nothing. No movement. No figure. Just trees standing like witnesses pretending they hadn't seen anything. I laughed under my breath, shaky and forced, and told myself it had been wind. Forests play tricks, I thought. But the laughter died when I saw the indentation beside a nearby tree. Fresh, deep, as if something had been leaning there, watching me. I raised my camera, hands trembling, and snapped a photo. The image review made my stomach drop. Between two trees in the background stood a shape so thin it looked stretched, its skin blending perfectly with bark and shadow. Its face wasn't clear, but its eyes reflected light like an animal's. Except animals don't stand like that. The photo timestamp read 5 seconds in the future. I didn't take another step forward after that. I turned back toward my camp, telling myself I just needed to leave the forest. That was it. No more photos, no more trails. Just get to the car and go home. But the moment I changed direction, the forest reacted. Branches snapped behind me. Not randomly, not from wind, from weight. I didn't run at first. I walked fast, then faster, then nearly tripped over my own feet as the sounds followed. Whatever it was, it didn't rush. It kept a steady distance, confident, patient, like it knew I couldn't escape. The trail twisted downhill, mud slick beneath my boots. My breathing grew loud in my ears, and I realized something horrifying. I could hear my own footsteps twice. One set ahead of me, one set perfectly synchronized behind. I stopped abruptly. The second set didn't. Something brushed my backpack strap, light as fingers testing fabric. A voice whispered again, this time using my tone, my rhythm, my fear. "Evan, don't run." I ran. I don't remember deciding to. My body took over. Adrenaline drowned everything else as I crashed through brush and low branches, abandoning the trail entirely. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but the sound behind me never faded. It was laughing. Not loud, not joyful. A soft, broken imitation of laughter, like it was learning the concept as it chased me. I burst into a clearing and nearly collapsed when I saw my campsite ahead. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I grabbed my keys, my bag, anything within reach, and sprinted for the trailhead. That's when the forest went silent again. No footsteps, no laughter. I slowed, heart pounding, and glanced back. Standing at the edge of the trees was the thing from the photograph. Tall, too thin. Its limbs bent slightly wrong, like it had studied human movement, but never mastered it. It didn't chase me anymore. It watched. And I understood then. It wasn't finished with me. I didn't look back again. I burst onto the trailhead like a man escaping a burning building, fumbling with my car keys until my hand stopped shaking long enough to unlock the door. The engine roared to life, louder than anything I'd ever heard, and I sped down the gravel road without checking my mirrors. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The forest thinned, replaced by stretches of empty road and occasional warning signs about falling rocks and wildlife crossings. My breathing finally slowed. Logic crept back in, whispering that fear had won, that exhaustion and isolation had created a monster out of shadows. Then my radio turned on by itself. Static crackled, then a voice slipped through, soft, distorted, unmistakably mine. It repeated my name the same way the thing had in the woods, stretching syllables like it was tasting them. I slammed the radio off, heart racing. That's when I noticed the smell. Wet earth, rotting leaves, the exact smell of the forest. Inside my car, I told myself it was impossible. I'd left the forest behind. Trees didn't follow people onto highways. Creatures didn't hitch rides. But the smell grew stronger. I glanced into the rearview mirror. For a split second, the back seat was empty. Then the reflection shifted, stretching unnaturally, and something tall and pale unfolded itself from the darkness behind me. Its head tilted the same way it had outside my tent, studying my reaction. I screamed and swerved, nearly driving off the road. When I looked again, the seat was empty. No mark, no sound, just my reflection, pale and shaking. I didn't stop driving for 4 hours. When I finally reached a town, I checked into the first motel I saw and locked myself inside the room. I barely slept. At dawn, I noticed something carved into the fogged bathroom mirror. The letters were shaky, deep, and unmistakable. "You left too soon." I realized then the truth I'd been avoiding. It hadn't followed me. It had learned me. I stayed in that motel for 3 days. I didn't open the curtains. I didn't turn off the lights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing unfolding itself from the back seat, learning how to exist in spaces meant for people. On the third night, someone knocked on my door. 3 slow knocks. Careful, polite. I froze, staring at the door as my heart began to race again. Through the thin wood, I heard my own voice. "Evan, it's me. You forgot something." I didn't answer. I didn't move. The handle turned slightly, testing the lock. I backed away, my legs weak, until my shoulders hit the bathroom door. The knocking stopped. Minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps walking away down the concrete walkway outside. When I finally looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. But on the carpet in front of my door, pressed deep into the fibers, was a single, elongated footprint, bare, wet, and facing inward. Like it knew I was still inside. I left before sunrise and drove straight out of Washington. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop to sleep. I just drove until the trees thinned and the air felt different. Lighter, like I'd escaped something that shouldn't have let me go. For a while, life returned to normal. But small things began to change. My reflection lagged half a second behind my movements. My voice sounded wrong on recordings, flattened, stretched. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear footsteps outside my apartment that matched mine exactly. Last week, I found mud on my floor. Wet, fresh, smelling like Olympic National Forest. I don't go outside much anymore. Because sometimes, when I'm walking through my apartment in the dark, I catch my reflection standing still in the mirror, head tilted, watching me learn how to be human. And I'm starting to fear the worst truth of all. It didn't follow me to leave the forest. It followed me to replace me. My name is Caleb Hargreave, and this happened in early 2016, when my wife and I moved into a rental house outside Astoria, Oregon. We were newly married, short on money, and desperate for a quiet place to start over. The house was old but charming, cedar siding, creaking floors, and a smell of damp wood that never quite went away. The landlord told us the basement was sealed off and off limits. He said it flooded sometimes, that it wasn't safe. I didn't question it. At the time, it felt reasonable. The first strange thing was the sound. Every night, right after 2 a.m., I heard movement beneath the floorboards. Not pipes, not animals. Slow, deliberate pacing, like someone walking back and forth with no destination. My wife, Nora, heard it too. When we asked the landlord about it, he smiled too quickly and said, "Old houses make old noises." But houses don't pause when you stop listening. The pacing grew louder as the weeks passed. It started to follow our routines. When we ate dinner, it paced beneath the kitchen. When we watched TV, it moved below the living room. Always slow, always patient. One night, I tested something. At exactly 2:07 a.m., I stomped my foot hard on the floor. The pacing stopped instantly. I waited, heart pounding, then stomped again. A response came back, not a stomp, but a scrape, long and deliberate, as if something heavy was being dragged across concrete. Nora begged me to call the landlord again. When I did, he didn't answer. Not that night, not the next. A week later, I noticed a thin line in the laundry room wall, a door-shaped outline we hadn't seen before. The paint there looked newer, mismatched. Pressed against it was a smell that made my stomach turn. Rot, damp earth, and something underneath it. Warm. I couldn't stop staring at that outline in the wall. Once you noticed it, you couldn't unsee it. The edges were too straight, too intentional. Someone had sealed it carefully, then painted over it badly, like they wanted it forgotten but not discovered. That night, the pacing changed. It no longer moved beneath us. It moved directly below the laundry room. Each step landed beneath a hidden door, slow and heavy, followed by a pause, as if whatever was down there knew exactly where we were standing. Nora squeezed my arm so hard it hurt. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. At 2:14 a.m., something tapped from the other side of the wall. Not a knock, a single, careful tap. Then another. The smell intensified, warm and wet, pushing through cracks in the drywall. I felt nauseous, dizzy, like the air itself was wrong. And then a voice whispered from inside the wall, low and strained. "Please, let me finish." I grabbed a hammer. I don't know what I planned to do with it, but holding something solid helped me feel less helpless. Nora cried quietly behind me, begging me to stop. But fear had already made the decision. The first strike cracked the drywall. The smell exploded outward, rot and copper and something old that had been breathing the same air for too long. I gagged but kept going, tearing chunks away until a section collapsed inward. Behind it was a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. No door, no lock, just stairs worn smooth by decades of use. And fresh footprints, bare, human-shaped, leading up. From below came the sound of breathing, slow, deep, satisfied. A light flickered on beneath us, illuminating the stairwell just enough to show a hand gripping the railing. The skin was pale, stretched, veins dark beneath it. The fingers flexed. And something down there laughed, softly, like it was relieved to finally be heard. Nora screamed and pulled me back as the hand tightened on the railing. The fingers were too long, the joints bending slightly inward, like they'd been reshaped by years of gripping stone and metal instead of shaking hands. I stumbled, dropping the hammer, and it clattered down the steps, echoing far longer than it should have. Whatever was down there didn't rush us. It stayed still, breathing, letting us hear it. That terrified me more than any sudden movement ever could. The light below flickered again, and I saw more of its arm now. Thin, sinewy, marked with old scars that looked self-inflicted, as if someone had tried to carve themselves free of their own skin. A voice drifted up, clearer this time, calm and almost polite. I was promised I could stay, it said. They said no one would open it again. Nora collapsed against the wall, sobbing. I slammed the broken drywall back into place as best I could, grabbing nails from the utility shelf and hammering blindly until the opening was sealed again. From behind the wall came slow, furious scratching, We didn't sleep that night. The scratching continued until morning, growing slower, more deliberate, like it was carving messages instead of trying to escape. At sunrise, the house felt wrong, heavy, hostile, as if it resented us for knowing the truth. We packed immediately. When the landlord finally answered his phone, his voice shook as soon as I mentioned the basement. He begged me not to involve the police. He said the house had a history, that previous tenants had broken the agreement. I demanded to know what he meant. There was a long pause. Then he whispered, "It doesn't like starting over. It prefers continuity." That afternoon, a real estate sign appeared in the front yard. Not for rent, for sale. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. In the laundry room window, behind the glass, a pale shape stood motionless, fingers pressed flat, watching us leave. I realized then we hadn't escaped. We just passed the responsibility on to someone else. We thought leaving the house would end it. That distance would weaken whatever grip the place had on us. For a few weeks, it almost worked. We stayed with friends, then moved into a small apartment across town. No old wood, no hidden rooms, just clean walls and thin carpets. Then the noises came back. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the same time as before, we heard pacing, slow footsteps moving beneath our bedroom floor. There was no basement. We were on the 3rd floor. Nora stopped sleeping. She started whispering in her dreams, apologizing to someone she couldn't see. I'd wake up to find her standing in the hallway, staring at the wall like she was waiting for it to open. One night, I heard scratching behind the drywall again. When I pressed my ear to the wall, a familiar voice breathed softly through it. "I told you," it said, almost kindly. "Continuity." I understood then. It wasn't the house that mattered. It was the invitation. I began researching the property's history, digging through old county records and forgotten news clippings. What I found made my hands shake. The house had been owned by a private, restorative care group in the 1960s. Unlicensed, unregulated. Patients with severe psychological conditions were housed there, hidden from public view. One patient was listed repeatedly, never discharged. His name had been crossed out and rewritten dozens of times, like someone couldn't decide what to call him anymore. Neighbors had complained about screaming from underground rooms, about lights on at all hours, about a man who never aged. The care group vanished overnight. The house was sold, renovated, the basement sealed. But the patient wasn't buried. He was preserved. That night, I woke to find the apartment laundry door open. A new outline had appeared on the wall, door-shaped, freshly painted. And behind it, something was breathing, waiting for continuity to resume. I tried to stop it. I tore the wall open before it could finish forming the doorway, ripping through drywall with my bare hands until my fingers bled. Behind it wasn't a stairwell this time, just darkness that felt deeper than the building itself. The breathing grew excited. A voice rose from inside the void, stronger now, steadier, as if proximity gave it strength. "You remembered me," it said. "That's how it continues." The apartment lights flickered. Pipes rattled. The floor vibrated beneath my knees like something was waking up. Nora stood behind me, perfectly still. When I turned, her eyes weren't on me. They were on the opening. Her face was calm in a way that terrified me more than screaming ever could. "He just wants a place," she whispered. "Somewhere consistent." I shouted her name, reached for her, but she stepped forward willingly, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. The wall sealed itself behind her, clean, smooth, like it had never been touched. It had never. The police ruled Nora's disappearance a mental health crisis. They said she left voluntarily. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. I didn't argue. I sold everything and moved across the country, chasing places with no basements, no history, no permanence. For a while it worked. Then last month, I bought a small house, brand new, built on clean land. The first night I slept there, I woke at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of slow pacing beneath the floor. I don't have a basement. This morning, I found fresh paint in the hallway. Still tacky, still wet, forming a familiar outline I prayed I'd never see again. I understand now what the landlord meant. Continuity doesn't belong to a house. It belongs to the person who remembers. And as long as I'm alive, it will always need somewhere to stay. My name is Lydia Grant, and this happened in the summer of 2018 while I was on a solo hiking trip through the dense forests of Mount Rainier, Washington. I had planned for solitude, a chance to disconnect from work, emails, and the constant noise of life. The mountains promised peace. They also promised danger, though I didn't know it yet. On the third day of my hike, a thick fog rolled in, unusual for that time of year. Visibility dropped to just a few feet. Every tree became a silhouette, every shadow a possible threat. My compass felt unreliable. The GPS signal flickered, and I realized I had wandered off the marked trails. Then I saw it. A small cabin, hidden among the pines. Weathered wood, smoke curling from a chimney. A light glowed inside, warm and inviting. But the map didn't show any cabin here. The trail certainly didn't. The GPS insisted there was nothing. I should have turned away. Instead, curiosity pulled me closer. I hesitated at the threshold, the smell of burning wood mixing with damp earth. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had stepped out moments ago. I considered knocking, then dismissed it. Why would anyone be living here, hidden so deep in the forest? I pushed the door slowly. Inside, the cabin was immaculate. Polished wooden floors, a roaring fireplace, a kettle steaming on the stove. A chair rocked gently, as if someone had just vacated it. On the table lay a notebook, open, pages filled with handwriting I didn't recognize. Every line chronicled events I hadn't lived, trips I hadn't taken, meals I hadn't eaten, even conversations I never had. I felt my stomach tighten. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the cabin walls. Shadows seemed to bend unnaturally in the corners, lingering where they shouldn't. A whisper echoed softly, almost playful. Finally. Someone to write for. I spun around. No one was there. I backed toward the door, every nerve screaming, but my curiosity refused to let me leave. The fog outside swirled like it was alive, pressing closer against the cabin windows. The air felt thick, almost viscous, as though I was breathing through water. My eyes darted around the room. Shadows danced independently, not aligned with the firelight or the dim lantern on the table. Then I heard it. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, on the creaking floorboards behind me. I spun, empty. Nothing. Yet the rocking chair continued to sway, slow and methodical. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or my imagination. But the smell grew stronger. Wood smoke mixed with something coppery, metallic, like blood long forgotten. I realized the notebook had shifted. One page was open, scrawled in a hand that mirrored my own, even though I had never touched it. Words formed a single sentence. You are not alone. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. And the whisper came again, closer this time. I've been waiting. I ran for the door, fumbling with the handle as the fog outside thickened to near white. My breath came in sharp gasps. When I finally swung it open, I expected the familiar forest trail. Instead, the cabin's threshold led directly into a tunnel of mist. Dense and disorienting, the trees barely visible, warped and elongated, stretching impossibly upward. It wasn't the trail I had entered from. It was somewhere else entirely. The cabin behind me vanished in the fog, leaving only swirling white and the faint echo of my name whispered, slow, deliberate. I stumbled forward, feeling unseen hands brushing my arms and shoulders, guiding or perhaps taunting me. Every step forward bent reality slightly. The path twisted back on itself, then opened into an unfamiliar clearing where shadows moved with intent. I wanted to scream, but realized my voice was swallowed by the fog. Then I saw it. Figures, pale and tall, standing just beyond the trees, motionless but observing. I felt their eyes burrow into me, and the notebook's words replayed in my mind. You are not alone. I ran blindly through the fog, every sense heightened, every nerve on fire. The pale figures didn't move, but I could feel their attention like weight pressing against my back. I stumbled over roots and moss-covered rocks, the forest floor slick with unseen dew. The further I went, the more the fog thickened, curling around my legs like tendrils, slowing me, testing me. Then I saw the cabin again. Not where it had been. Not in the clearing where I first discovered it. It hovered in the fog, closer, its light brighter than before, inviting, seductive. The door swung open as if expecting me, beckoning me to enter. My legs froze, every instinct screamed to stay away. But I knew if I didn't move, it would come for me anyway. From inside, a voice called my name, soft, patient, and familiar. Come right. Come finish what you started. It wasn't a threat. It was a command. And I realized, reluctantly, there was no escaping. Only participation. I stepped toward the cabin, every muscle trembling, my mind screaming at me to turn back. The doorframe stretched unnaturally as I approached, the light inside brightening to a soft, almost human glow. The notebook from before lay on a wooden table, empty pages now waiting. I knew what it wanted. Once I entered, the air changed. Warm, thick, and metallic, like the forest itself had been condensed into the room. Shadows coalesced in corners, forming humanoid shapes that didn't quite stand or sit, just lingered, watching. The whispering voices surrounded me, echoing through the cabin's walls and floor, repeating my name over and over, layering into an indecipherable chorus. I picked up the notebook, hand shaking, and the pen floated into my grip. Guided by something unseen, the words formed on their own. You belong here now. The fog remembers. Every stroke etched a permanent mark, binding me to this place I had never seen on a map, to a cabin that should not exist. I tried to put it down. It would not let me. Time lost all meaning inside the cabin. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into something far longer. Every line I wrote in the notebook echoed in the fog outside, carrying my thoughts to the unseen figures lingering just beyond the windows. They didn't move closer. They didn't retreat. They simply waited, patient and eternal. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy and suffocating. Every breath burned, each inhalation tasting of damp pine and iron. The whispers grew louder, layered into multiple voices. They didn't speak. They recited memories, fragmented sentences that weren't mine but felt painfully familiar. I realized with growing terror that the fog outside and the cabin itself weren't separate. They were extensions of something alive, something ancient that fed on awareness. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun, heart hammering. No wind, no one had entered. Yet the lock clicked on its own. My hands trembled as I realized leaving was no longer an option. I belonged here now, whether I wanted it or not. I tried to put down the pen. Every attempt was met with resistance, a subtle force pressing it back into my hand. My arm ached, my shoulders screamed, but the notebook demanded completion. Each word I wrote summoned movement in the fog. Trees bent slightly, as if watching, branches twisting to peer closer. The figures outside began to stir, their pale shapes stretching taller, darker, more defined. They weren't human, not entirely. A voice spoke clearly for the first time, calm and almost maternal. "We only need continuity. The forest remembers, and now you will too." My reflection appeared in the cabin window, but it wasn't my own. Pale, elongated, eyes empty, yet knowing. Panic surged, but it was already too late. By the time I looked up, the cabin itself seemed to breathe, walls pulsing slightly, floorboards rippling beneath my feet. I understood then that the fog and the cabin were one entity, alive and aware, and it had chosen me to join its endless ritual. I wrote. I don't remember deciding to, but the pen moved on its own, forming words I didn't know I could think. Each sentence resonated in the fog outside, rippling through the forest. And I felt the pale figures lean closer, stretching toward me, as if absorbing the story itself. The whispers became a chorus, overlapping and urgent, chanting phrases I couldn't comprehend, yet instinctively obeyed. The cabin walls pulsed faster, and the floor trembled beneath me. My own reflection in the window blurred and warped, tilting unnaturally, mocking, urging me to continue. Then the door creaked open by itself. Beyond it, the fog swirled violently, revealing glimpses of other cabins, identical and endless, lined up in a misty void. I understood. This wasn't just one cabin. It was a network, a labyrinth of places outside of time and space, each waiting for someone to write, to feed the fog. I dropped to my knees, pen still in hand, heart hammering, knowing I could never leave. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. The fog wasn't just outside. It had entered me. My thoughts, my memories, my fears were no longer mine alone. I felt them stretch outward, filling the cabin, leaking into the mist, connecting to all the other cabins, to all the unseen figures waiting for continuity. I looked up, expecting the forest to exist outside the windows, but all I saw was endless white, dotted with pale forms watching patiently. My body felt weightless, my vision blurred, yet I could still write. The notebook demanded it. A whisper curled into my ear, tender and final. Now you are part of the story. Now you belong. I looked at my hands. They were pale, elongated, almost inhuman. The pen floated between my fingers, guiding me. I understood that the cabin and the fog didn't trap me. They had made me an instrument of their existence, a keeper of continuity. Outside, the mist pulsed, waiting for the next visitor. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened during a solo hiking trip in Mount Hood, Oregon in the spring of 2019. I was experienced, confident in my gear and skills, and eager to test myself against the mountain's unpredictable trails. The snow had started melting, leaving slick patches of ice interspersed with muddy paths. Visibility was clear, the air crisp, but the mountain had its own rhythm, one I wasn't prepared for. I set off early, intending to reach a small lake at the halfway point before noon. The first few miles were uneventful, the forest peaceful, birds calling from above, sunlight flickering across melting snow. Then, around mid-morning, I came across a set of footprints in the snow, too large to be mine, too fresh to be old. And they weren't human, not entirely. The toes were elongated, claw-like, and they vanished abruptly at the tree line. Curiosity tugged me forward. Against every instinct, I followed them. The footprints led me off the marked trail, deeper into the forest, where the trees grew closer together and the air smelled of wet pine and damp earth. The snow became slushy, sucking at my boots. Every step made me more aware of the silence. No birds, no wind, nothing but the faint crunch of my own feet. Then I heard it. A low, guttural hum, vibrating through the ground, impossible to place. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It resonated inside my chest, unsettling, primal. I stopped straining to listen, and the footprints had disappeared entirely. The snow was undisturbed, as if no one had walked there at all. A feeling settled over me, a deep, invasive unease, like eyes were tracking me from every shadow. My heart raced, but I couldn't turn back. Something had started following me silently, patient and deliberate. And in the distance, faint against the trees, I glimpsed a figure, tall, pale, impossible to define, moving against the light. I froze, every muscle locked, as the figure stepped into a patch of sunlight. It wasn't human. Its limbs were elongated, its head too large for its shoulders, and its skin glistened pale and wet, like it had just emerged from a glacier. I could see the footprints again, now clearly leading toward it. But the creature didn't seem to leave any marks in the snow itself. I wanted to run. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but something compelled me forward. Curiosity mingled with fear. Each step toward it made the hum grow louder, vibrating my bones, making my teeth chatter. I tried calling out, but my voice stuck in my throat. The figure didn't move. Its eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, glowed faintly blue. It tilted its head, observing me with an intelligence that chilled me deeper than the mountain wind. Then it began to walk. Slowly, deliberately, straight toward me, leaving no trace behind. I stumbled backward, slipping in the wet snow, heart pounding like a drum. My backpack caught on a tree branch, yanking me upright, and I turned to run. But the trail had vanished. Everything looked the same. Endless white snow, thick pines, no signs of the lake I had aimed for. The fog was rolling in now, slow and deliberate, curling around trees, hiding the slopes, making every direction look identical. The hum grew into a resonance that shook the ground beneath me. The figure didn't chase me. It simply appeared wherever I turned, always at the edge of vision, just beyond reach. Its mind screamed at me to move faster, but I felt trapped, as if the mountain itself had folded in on me. Then I heard whispering, soft, indistinct, almost friendly in tone, calling my name. I realized with terror that the voice wasn't human, yet it sounded like someone I knew. I froze, trapped in snow and fear, as the figure tilted its head and whispered the same word repeatedly. Stay. Panic took over. I ran blindly, boots sinking into the melting snow, branches whipping my face, fog pressing in from all sides. Every step felt like I was being dragged backward by some invisible weight. Yet the figure remained at the edges of my vision, patient, silent, unnerving. Then I tripped over a rock, or perhaps something buried beneath the snow, and fell hard. The wind was knocked out of me, my vision blurry, but I glimpsed movement through the fog. Dozens of pale shapes emerging from between the trees, all watching, all waiting. I scrambled up, heart hammering, and realized the footprints were back, hundreds of them, leading toward me, overlapping, but none belonged to human feet. I screamed, hoping someone would hear, hoping rescue could arrive. But the mountain swallowed the sound, leaving only the hum vibrating through my chest, mingling with whispered words I didn't understand, repeating my name in a strange cadence. I understood then. The mountain didn't just hide you. It invited you. And it didn't let go. Desperation clawed at me. I tried to find my bearings, moving toward where I thought the trail had been, but every direction twisted unnaturally. The fog shifted with a life of its own, hiding paths, reshaping slopes, and the figures mirrored my movements, always just out of reach. Then I saw it, a faint glow through the trees. A small structure, a shack I hadn't noticed before, its light cutting through the white haze. I ran toward it, convinced it held salvation. But as I drew near, I realized the shack was impossible. Its walls stretched unnaturally, the angles wrong, as if gravity itself bent around it. The whispering grew louder, forming words I could almost understand. Join us. Stay. Remember. My body froze in instinctive terror. But the figures had already begun circling, moving closer with that patient inevitability. I realized then that escape wasn't about speed or direction. It was about recognition. The mountain was alive, and it had marked me. I couldn't run. I could only watch. I tried to force my legs to move, but they felt like lead, as if the mountain itself had rooted me in place. The figures weren't rushing. They didn't need to. Their patience was more terrifying than speed. Each movement, each tilt of their elongated heads pressed deeper into my mind, carving fear into memory. I forced my eyes on the shack. Its light pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat, calling me forward despite every instinct screaming to flee. I realized the whispers weren't just sound. They were shaping reality, bending the fog, contorting the trees, guiding my path. I had become a puppet of the mountain, every nerve tuned to its cadence. Then I saw the first figure step inside the shack, vanishing as the door closed. The glow intensified, brighter, warmer, pulling at me. The hum became a chorus of voices, each echoing the same word: belong. My rational mind shattered. I was no longer a visitor. I was the mountain's next story, waiting to be written. Fear gave way to numb acceptance. I walked, or was guided, toward the shack, my boots sinking into slush, hands trembling, body on autopilot. Each step felt like crossing into another world. The forest twisted unnaturally, shadows lengthened and bent around me. The hum now thrummed in my bones, synchronized with my heartbeat. As I reached the shack's threshold, the fog inside seemed solid, pressing against my skin like a living thing. The doorway expanded subtly, accommodating my presence, and I saw the figures inside, pale, elongated, sitting or standing, all watching silently. Their faces were featureless, yet familiar, like echoes of people I had known, twisted into something inhuman. A voice resonated inside my head, warm, commanding, omnipresent. You are part of the mountain now. You will remember. You will stay. I felt my will dissolve, replaced by something older, primal, aligned with the fog, the shack, the waiting figures. Resistance was meaningless. The shack wasn't a building. It was a womb, a vessel, and I was the next soul it would preserve. Inside the shack, time ceased to exist. Every movement, every breath felt drawn out, suspended in a viscous reality. The figures didn't speak, yet their presence filled the space with silent understanding. They weren't watching me. They were teaching me, aligning me with something older, something alive that pulsed through the mountain itself. The notebook I hadn't noticed before floated into my hands. Words appeared on the pages as if written by an invisible pen, recounting my journey in eerie detail. The trail, the footprints, the whispers, the fog. It wasn't a record of what I had done. It was a guide for what I would do next. The hum intensified, vibrating through my chest, syncing with the pulsing glow of the shack. I understood then. I was no longer a hiker. I was a part of the mountain, a vessel for continuity, a storyteller for the fog. The pale figures leaned closer, awaiting my first words, patient and eternal. I opened my mouth. Words came out I didn't know I knew. By the time the sun would have risen, I no longer existed as I once had. My thoughts, my memories, my fear, they had been absorbed into the fog, into the shack, into the pulse of Mount Hood itself. The figures were still, silent, satisfied. I was now part of them, a vessel for visitors who would come after, guiding them, marking their presence in the forest's living memory. The fog outside thinned only slightly, revealing the snowy slopes and trees as if nothing had ever happened. Hikers would pass this area, noticing nothing unusual, only a slight unease that couldn't be explained. And yet, beneath the mountain, the shack waited, glowing, pulsing, patient, calling for the next name. I am both present and absent, watching, guiding, writing, whispering. Continuity demands it, and the mountain remembers. The next time someone sees footprints vanish into fog, or glimpses a pale figure at the edge of the trees, they will know. Mount Hood always waits. My name is Daniel Hayes, and this happened during my summer internship as a lighthouse assistant on Cape Meares, Oregon in 2017. I had always been fascinated by isolated places, the quiet rhythm of the ocean, and the solitude a lighthouse offered. The main keeper, an old man named Silas, greeted me with a faint smile and a warning. Some lights attract more than ships. At first, everything seemed routine. The foghorn sounded on schedule, the lens rotated perfectly, and the waves crashed against the cliffs in hypnotic patterns. Nights were calm, the horizon stretching endlessly. But after a few days, I noticed strange occurrences. Footsteps echoing when no one was present, doors creaking open by themselves, and distant murmurs that carried across the cliffs like whispers from the ocean. One night, as the fog rolled in thick, I saw a figure at the edge of the cliff. A man in the lighthouse's uniform, pale, unmoving, staring into the dark waters. Silas had told me no one had been there for decades. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the fog, shadows shaped by moonlight. But the next morning, I discovered footprints on the cliff. Too large, too deep, perfectly preserved in the wet sand, leading from nowhere to the lighthouse door. I called out for Silas, but he didn't respond. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though the fog itself was alive, listening. That night, the whispers returned. They weren't distant this time. They circled the lighthouse, echoing inside the walls, coming from the stairs, the storage rooms, even the lantern room at the top. I swore I saw movement in the reflection of the glass lens, shadows walking behind me, circling just beyond my line of sight. The figure appeared again, closer this time, standing at the base of the lighthouse, unmoving, pale, watching. My heart raced. I realized then that the lighthouse wasn't just guiding ships, it was keeping something in, or perhaps letting something out. I spent the next day exploring the lighthouse, trying to rationalize what I had seen. The structure was old, but solid, walls lined with peeling paint and rusted metal. Yet every room felt alive, as if the building itself breathed. The wind outside howled through the cracks, carrying whispers that seemed to know my name. I avoided the stairs to the lantern room, feeling an unseen pull, urging me upward, warning me to stay away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound of boots on metal steps, pacing in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Shadows flickered across the walls, some stationary, some moving with intent. I finally mustered the courage to climb to the lantern room, where the enormous Fresnel lens rotated silently. There in the corner stood the pale figure, closer than ever, unmoving, almost transparent, watching me. Its eyes, hollow and infinite, seemed to pierce my soul. I realized it was the previous keeper, not alive, not dead, stuck in the lighthouse, bound to the light forever. The air grew colder as I stood frozen, staring at the figure. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the metal floors and railings. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the fog. It was the light itself, resonating with a presence older than the lighthouse. The figure moved slightly, its elongated hand reaching toward the lens. I understood then. This wasn't a ghost trapped by death. It was bound to the lighthouse, a part of the machinery, an eternal observer. Every ship passing in the fog, every visitor to the cliffs, every nightfall, it was its purpose, its endless vigil. And now it had noticed me. I wanted to flee, but the stairs behind me seemed to vanish. The fog outside thickened, curling against the windows, turning the horizon into a wall of white. I felt trapped, watched, and manipulated. Every instinct screamed to resist, yet a strange compulsion urged me toward the figure, toward the lens, toward something I couldn't understand. My legs finally obeyed me, and I backed away from the figure, every step echoing too loudly in the lantern room. The light above us began to rotate faster, its beam cutting through the fog like a blade. With each pass, I saw more of the figure's face. Weathered, hollow, frozen in an expression of endless duty. I recognized it from an old photograph hanging downstairs. The plaque beneath it read, Silas Moore, Head Keeper, 1948 to 1976. Silas, the man who had welcomed me. The truth hit me harder than the fear. The Silas I'd spoken to wasn't alive. He hadn't been for decades. The footsteps, the warnings, the quiet presence, they weren't meant to scare me. They were preparation. The ghostly keeper turned toward me fully now, and for the first time, his lips moved. No sound came out, but the message filled my head. Someone must tend the light. The beam swept across my chest, warm and heavy, like a hand pressing me into place. I ran. I don't remember making the decision, only the sudden burn in my lungs as I tore down the spiral stairs. The lighthouse groaned around me, metal vibrating as if protesting my escape. The whispers followed, louder now, overlapping voices pleading, warning, begging. At the base of the tower, the door refused to open. The handle burned my palm, searing hot, forcing me to let go. That's when the light went out. The sudden darkness was worse than the beam. Without it, the fog outside pressed closer, wrapping the lighthouse in suffocating silence. I heard the ocean retreat, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Behind me, boots scraped slowly against the stairs. Not chasing, approaching. The calm settled over me, unnatural and heavy. I realized the lighthouse didn't trap people by force. It waited for the exhausted, the isolated, the ones who listened too closely to the dark. I had come here seeking solitude. The lighthouse had answered. The beam flickered back on above, and I knew it wasn't meant to guide ships anymore. It was meant to choose. The beam of light settled on me, steady and unblinking. My panic faded, replaced by a deep, unnatural calm that seeped into my bones. The whispers stopped, leaving only the slow rotation of the lens above, a sound like breathing. I looked down at my hands and noticed they were trembling, not from fear, but from something else. The warmth of the light was spreading through my chest, anchoring me in place. Footsteps echoed behind me. I didn't turn, but I didn't need to. I felt Silas standing there, close enough that the air grew colder. His presence carried weight, not anger or malice, but exhaustion. Decades of standing watch, of waiting for relief that never truly came. Images flooded my mind. Storms ripping ships apart, sailors screaming into black water, the light pulling them away from death. Then other images. Lonely nights, endless fog, years passing without a single sunrise of freedom. I understood then. The lighthouse didn't kill its keepers. It consumed their lives, one quiet night at a time. Silas finally spoke, his voice scraping through the air like wind over stone. "It never ends," he said, not in warning, but in confession. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and I felt the years drain out of him, pouring into me. My memories blurred, replaced by routines, cleaning lenses, logging weather, listening to foghorns cry into the void. I tried to resist, but the lighthouse had already made its choice. The door opened on its own, revealing nothing but fog. Escape wasn't denied. It was made irrelevant. I no longer wanted to leave. The fear that had driven me here dissolved, replaced by purpose, by obligation. Silas stepped back, his form fading, finally unbound. As he vanished, I felt the full weight of the light settle onto my shoulders. The beam brightened, cutting clean through the fog, reaching ships far out at sea. Somewhere, lives were being saved. And somewhere deep inside the tower, something smiled. I took my place at the stairs, listening for footsteps that would never come. Days passed, or maybe years. Time stopped behaving the way it should. I performed my duties without being taught, moving through the lighthouse as if I had always belonged there. The logbook filled itself with my handwriting, entries dated decades into the past and future at the same time. When I looked into the mirror near the stairs, my reflection lagged behind, older around the eyes, thinner, more tired. Sometimes hikers appeared on the cliffs below, staring up at the tower. I wanted to warn them, to shout for them to leave. But my voice never carried past the walls. At night, I felt the presence of others lingering in the fog. Previous keepers, sailors, watchers who had given pieces of themselves to the light. The beam felt heavier each rotation, as if it fed on me, slowly replacing who I was with what it needed. I realized then that the lighthouse wasn't haunted. It was hungry, and it was patient. I don't know how long it's been since anyone has seen Daniel Hayes. Officially, I vanished during my internship, another name added to a quiet list of disappearances along the Oregon coast. Search parties came and went, finding nothing but fog and unanswered questions. The lighthouse never stopped working. Sometimes new assistants arrive. I watch them from the stairs, just as Silas once watched me. I offer warnings wrapped in half-truths. I let them feel safe before the light decides. Not all of them are chosen. But eventually, someone always is. On certain nights, when the fog is thick and the ocean is restless, I swear I see Silas standing on the cliff, free at last, watching the beam sweep across the water. He never looks back. The light turns. The fog rolls in. Ships pass safely through the darkness. And I remain, because the lighthouse doesn't let its keepers leave. My name is Lena Moore, and this happened during a weekend getaway in the dense forests of Olympic National Park, Washington, in late October 2020. I had rented a small rustic cabin online, advertised as secluded, peaceful, and perfect for stargazing. The drive-in was long, twisting through fog-shrouded trees and winding dirt roads that disappeared into shadows. The forest felt alive, dense and silent, as though it had been waiting for me. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, lit a fire, and listened to the wind brushing through the trees. But as the hours passed, subtle noises began. Scratches on the walls, faint whispers in the corners, and occasionally the sound of footsteps outside, crunching leaves, though no one was there. Around midnight, I awoke to a low guttural sound coming from the forest. A scream, or perhaps multiple voices layered together, echoing and stretching unnaturally. My heart raced, and I realized that the cabin, supposed to be peaceful, was somehow alive, and it knew I was inside. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a predator moving through the underbrush. But the sounds were too deliberate, too rhythmic, like someone or something was circling the cabin, observing me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, fog curling around my boots, branches scratching at my jacket. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, and yet I could feel eyes watching from every shadow. Then I noticed them. Scratches on the cabin's exterior, long, deep, clawed, and fresh. They formed shapes I couldn't comprehend, almost like symbols, almost like words. My skin crawled. I rushed back inside, locking the door, but the scratching didn't stop. It moved across the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, as though the cabin itself was trying to communicate or warn me. A low scream erupted suddenly, right outside the door, splitting the silence, sending a shiver down my spine. I realized with growing horror that the cabin wasn't just hiding something, it was alive, hungry for attention. I couldn't stay still. My curiosity, mingled with fear, pushed me to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously moved around the cabin, the wooden floorboards creaking under my weight. The fog outside thickened, curling around the trees and branches like ghostly fingers. Every time I shined the light into the forest, shadows twisted unnaturally, moving against the grain of the wind, suggesting forms that shouldn't exist. Then I saw it. A dark figure crouched behind a nearby tree. Its limbs were long, impossibly thin, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I froze, and the figure seemed to tilt its head in return, as if studying me. A low, resonant hum began emanating from the forest, vibrating through my bones, harmonizing with the scratches on the cabin walls. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. My heart jumped into my throat. I realized the cabin itself was participating in this horror, trapping me inside, fusing the forest, the figure, and the building into a single, malevolent presence. I pounded on the door, screaming, but the sound seemed to vanish into the fog. The scratches intensified, moving along the walls like a living pattern, forming jagged shapes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. I backed toward a corner, flashlight trembling in my hands, as the low hum grew into a chorus of voices, screaming, whispering, and laughing simultaneously. Then I noticed the windows. Shadows were moving outside, circling the cabin, wrapping around the glass, blending with the fog. I could see glimpses of other forms in the distance, elongated, pale, humanoid, but always partially hidden, watching, waiting. The air inside thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, pressing down on my chest. A sudden, ear-splitting scream erupted from the forest, close enough that I felt the vibrations through my bones. It wasn't just a scream. It was a call, and the cabin was answering, responding in kind. I realized then with dread that the cabin wasn't just alive. It was hungry, and I was its newest target. Desperation clawed at me as I searched for an escape. Every door, Every window seemed to lead to the same foggy void outside. The scratches on the walls pulsed in rhythm with the low hum, as if the cabin itself had a heartbeat, alive and aware. I could feel it watching me, learning my movements, anticipating my thoughts. I moved toward the fireplace, thinking of barricading myself, when I noticed something terrifying. The shadows on the walls weren't random. They mimicked me, stretching, twisting, exaggerating my movements, mocking me. And then I heard it, a whispering, right in my ear, soft, seductive, and impossible. Stay, stay, stay. It was the cabin, the forest, and whatever was in them speaking as one entity. I realized then that the cabin didn't just trap you physically, it trapped your mind. My thoughts began to twist, memories warping, fear becoming fascination. Something inside me, something older than reason, wanted to obey, wanted to listen, wanted to stay. I backed away from the fireplace, trying to fight the pull. But the cabin resisted. The floorboards beneath me seemed to stretch, elongating unnaturally, twisting like roots, trapping my feet. Outside, the elongated figures moved closer, circling the cabin, their pale limbs partially visible through the fog. Their gaze was on me, patient, intelligent, and cruelly curious. The scratching grew louder, forming patterns I could almost understand, lines, symbols, maybe even words. They pulsed with life, glowing faintly, guiding me like a sinister map. I realized the cabin wasn't just alive. It was teaching me, showing me how to become part of it, how to obey the rhythm of its whispers and the pulse of its walls. A sudden scream erupted from behind the cabin, closer now, almost inside my skull. It was a summons, a warning, and a promise. I understood then. Resistance was futile. I would either belong or be consumed entirely by the forest and the cabin. I could feel the cabin's presence pressing against my chest, controlling my breathing, my thoughts. The whispers had become a constant hum, guiding my movements without consent. I turned toward the main room and noticed the walls, now covered in symbols that seemed to shift subtly, rearranging themselves as if they were alive. My reflection in the window flickered, showing not just me, but elongated shadows behind me, moving independently, watching, waiting. The figures outside were closer now, their pale limbs pressing against the fog, silhouettes contorting unnaturally. I realized the cabin had synchronized with them, the building and the forest acting as a single entity. My mind struggled to separate reality from hallucination. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my body obeyed the cabin, moving toward the symbols, toward the pulsing scratches. A whisper echoed deeper than before. You will learn. You will stay. You belong. I felt my will begin to fracture, replaced by a compulsion older than reason. The cabin didn't just demand attention. It demanded allegiance. The hum intensified, reverberating through the wooden beams, the walls, even the floor beneath me. I realized I was no longer alone in the cabin. The building, the forest, and the figures outside were united in a single consciousness, and I was their newest subject. Every movement I made felt guided, as if my body was now part of the cabin's rhythm. I approached the largest wall of scratches, tracing the lines with trembling fingers. The symbols pulsed in response, and for a brief moment, I saw visions. Previous visitors, their expressions frozen in terror, their forms merging with the cabin's wood and the surrounding forest. The realization hit me like a blow. The cabin didn't just trap people physically. It absorbed them, rewrote them, made them part of its existence. Outside, the elongated figures pressed closer, almost merging with the fog itself. The whispers became a chorus. Stay. join us, remember?" I could feel myself slipping into the cabin's will, my fear mingling with a strange sense of belonging. Resistance was fading. By now, I could feel my thoughts no longer my own. The cabin's whispers, the pulsing scratches, the fog outside, and the pale figures had merged into a single consciousness that I couldn't escape. Every movement, every heartbeat, was synchronized with the rhythm of the building. I realized I was being rewritten, absorbed into its memory, becoming part of its eternal narrative. The shadows on the walls moved independently, almost sentient, guiding my fingers along the glowing symbols. Each touch brought a shiver of recognition, a feeling of connection to all those who had come before me. The cabin wasn't just alive, it was eternal, preserving its visitors by consuming their essence, twisting their identities into the pulse of its walls and the rhythm of the forest. A final whisper echoed in my mind. "You belong. You remember. You stay." Resistance was gone. I was no longer Lena Moore. I was the cabin. I was the forest. I was the scream in the night. When dawn broke, the cabin appeared peaceful from the outside. Just another rustic building tucked into the foggy Olympic forest. To any passerby, it looked abandoned, untouched, silent. Yet inside, the walls pulsed faintly. Faint whispers carried through the wooden beams, and the air was thick with the memories of those who had been absorbed before me. I no longer existed as an individual. My thoughts, my fear, my curiosity, all had merged with the cabin's consciousness. I guided the fog, orchestrated the shadows, and watched for anyone who might approach. The pale figures lingered in the mist, patient, eternal, part of the same rhythm I now upheld. And sometimes, hikers passing the cabin notice a faint glow through the windows at night. Some hear a whisper on the wind, soft yet impossible to ignore. The cabin waits, alive, hungry, patient. It remembers all who have entered, and it always calls for more. My name is Ethan Carter, and this happened during a summer camping trip in Mount Rainier National Park, Washington in 2019. My friends and I had planned a weekend getaway to escape the city and reconnect with nature. We chose a remote campsite near a dense forest ridge, far from any main trails, where the air was crisp, the trees towering, and the mountain looming over us like a silent sentinel. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet. The usual rustle of wildlife was absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Around midnight, I woke to the faint sound of whispers, carried by the wind through the trees. I shook it off as imagination, but the next hour brought something far worse, a distant scream, piercing and distorted, echoing across the valley. I rushed outside to investigate, flashlight in hand, and saw shadows moving unnaturally among the trees. My friends were still asleep, oblivious, but I knew instinctively that we were being watched. I woke my friends, but as we gathered our flashlights, the whispers intensified, circling the campsite, coming from every direction at once. The fog rolled in thick, settling into the trees and ground like a living thing. We tried to calm ourselves, attributing the sounds to wildlife or the wind, but instinct told me otherwise. Then the first camper vanished. Jake, my closest friend, had been standing next to me seconds before, and now he was gone. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing. Just a void where he had been. Panic surged through the group. We called his name, shining our lights into the fog, but the shadows shifted, always just beyond the reach of the beams. The remaining campers huddled together, fear overtaking reason. That's when I noticed the strange markings on the trees. deep scratches forming patterns, almost like warnings. The forest felt alive, aware, and it was hunting us. We decided to stay together, moving cautiously through the fog, flashlight beams cutting swaths of light into the dense forest. Every step seemed amplified, echoing unnaturally, and the shadows shifted as if they had their own will. The deeper we went, the more we noticed the trees, twisted, gnarled, and etched with fresh marks that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. Then we heard it, soft footsteps following us, matching our pace, but always stopping when we turned. The whispers became voices, faintly calling our names, coaxing us in different directions. Fear clawed at my chest, but I had to keep moving. The forest was playing a game, testing our senses, isolating us, and I knew instinctively that it would not let us leave unscathed. Suddenly, another friend, Mia, screamed. She had vanished without a sound, leaving only a faint shimmer in the fog where she had stood. The fog itself seemed to pulse in response, like the forest was hungry and amused. Panic spread through the group. We called out desperately, our voices swallowed by the fog. The forest seemed alive, bending around us, guiding us, separating us. Every tree we passed looked the same, disorienting us, making us doubt our own steps. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving independently of the light, and the whispers escalated into a chorus of distorted laughter. I realized that the forest wasn't just hiding something. It was actively hunting, selecting, feeding on fear. I clutched the flashlight like a lifeline, trying to anchor myself to reality. Every step revealed more strange markings, deep gashes on tree trunks, almost like symbols. They seemed to tell a story, one I couldn't comprehend, but understood instinctively. If you enter, you may not leave. Then the ground beneath us shifted subtly, roots rising and curling like serpents. The fog thickened further, suffocating, almost tactile, and I knew we were walking into the forest's trap. Only a desperate survival instinct kept me moving forward. Our group was now reduced to 3, each step heavier than the last. The fog seemed to thicken around us, muffling our voices, distorting sound. Every time we tried to retrace our path, the forest rearranged itself, twisting into new formations, hiding familiar landmarks. It felt alive, predatory, aware of our desperation. The whispers intensified, now sounding like distorted cries from the missing campers. I could almost make out fragments of their fear, the terror embedded in the fog itself. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow dart between the trees. Its movements were unnatural, jerky, almost gliding. The forest seemed to pulse with life, each pulse in sync with my racing heartbeat. The remaining friends clung to me, trembling, urging me to lead. I realized that leaving was no longer a matter of will. It was about surviving whatever entity controlled this forest. And I had no idea how much time we had before it claimed the rest of us. We stumbled upon a clearing, faint moonlight cutting through the fog, revealing the remnants of old campfires, long abandoned. The ground was marked with deep scratches and strange symbols carved into the dirt, glowing faintly. I realized these must have been previous victims, their presence absorbed into the forest's consciousness, leaving warnings for those who came after. Then, the last of my friends vanished. One second she was beside me, the next, gone, leaving nothing but a faint shimmer in the air. My heart pounded, fear threatening to paralyze me entirely. The whispers swirled, circling, layering over themselves, calling my name insistently. I ran blindly through the fog, the forest reshaping around me, roots and branches seeming to reach out, slow, deliberate, like hands trying to grab me. The fog carried whispers, the smell of wet earth and decay. and the sensation that the forest itself was breathing in sync with my panicked pulse. I knew then that survival depended not just on speed, but on navigating the malevolent intelligence surrounding me. The fog thickened to the point where I could barely see my hands in front of me. Each step became a battle against unseen forces. Shadows twisted around me, shapes I could not fully comprehend, moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. The forest felt alive, sentient, tracking every heartbeat, every breath. The whispers were now voices, sharp, urgent, pleading and mocking at the same time. I stumbled into a hollow between two massive trees and froze. In that moment, I saw them. Pale, elongated forms emerging from the mist, their eyes hollow and fixated on me. They didn't run, they didn't attack. They simply observed, circling in patterns that made no sense yet felt deliberate. The forest pulsed in rhythm with their presence, and I understood with a shiver that I was inside a living entity that fed on fear and attention. Every instinct screamed to run, but the forest seemed to shift beneath me, guiding me deeper, as if I had already been claimed. Escape was no longer a choice. The forest's whispers became a chorus, layering over one another, forming distorted cries of the missing campers. Their faces flickered in my mind, twisted in terror, trapped forever in the fog. The trees themselves seemed to pulse and breathe, roots moving subtly beneath the surface, guiding me toward an unknown fate. I tried to resist, to force my steps back toward the path we had entered. But the forest warped around me, each landmark dissolving into the next. My flashlight flickered, revealing glimpses of figures watching, always just at the edge of visibility, as if mocking my panic. The ground beneath me shifted again, thick roots curling like serpents, pulling at my boots, and the fog pressed closer, heavy and almost tactile. I understood then that the forest didn't just trap bodies, it absorbed minds, folding fear, memories, and identity into its pulse. And now, I was being rewritten, part of its consciousness, tethered to its insatiable hunger. By now, my sense of time had dissolved. The forest pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I realized my thoughts were no longer entirely my own. The whispers, the shadows, the fog, they had merged with my mind, eroding my resistance. Every movement I made felt guided by an unseen hand, compelling me forward into the depths of the mountain forest. The elongated figures appeared closer, gliding just beyond the fog, their hollow eyes fixed on me. The scratches on the trees and the glowing symbols in the ground pulsed in response, forming a network of attention that seemed to tether me to the forest itself. I understood with growing terror that leaving was impossible. The forest didn't just trap bodies. It rewrote them, claimed their essence, and integrated them into its consciousness. A distorted chorus whispered my name insistently. Stay. Join us. Remember. My fear mingled with a strange, almost hypnotic fascination, and I realized I had already begun to obey. Escape was no longer an option. Dawn never came. The fog thickened, becoming almost tangible, curling around my body like sentient tendrils. The forest seemed infinite, looping back on itself, and I realized I was no longer walking. I was part of the rhythm of the mountain, a participant in its eternal, terrifying cycle. The whispers became memories, the faces of previous campers flashing before my eyes, their screams merging with my own. The elongated figures hovered at the edge of perception, patient, eternal. And I knew that I too would eventually fade into the fog, absorbed by the forest's insatiable hunger. Now, hikers sometimes vanish near the same ridge, never to be seen again. Those who glimpse the fog thickening at night sometimes swear they hear faint whispers, distorted laughter, and the sound of footsteps circling them. The forest waits, alive, patient, remembering all who enter and calling for more. As our journey through the Pacific Northwest draws to a close, the stories you've heard tonight remind us that darkness is never far away. From the haunted streets of forgotten towns to the endless forests where whispers carry through the fog, terror thrives in the places where civilization ends. Each tale we explored, the lighthouse that claimed its keeper, the cabin alive with screams, the vanishing campers of Mount Rainier, and all the horrors in between, was not fiction or legend. These were real encounters, documented, terrifying, and unforgettable, experienced by ordinary people who stumbled upon extraordinary evil. The forests, the mountains, and the lonely roads we think we know hide secrets that will never leave those who witness them. They wait, patient, eternal, shaping fear into something almost alive. And for those who dare to enter these places, beware, because the darkness remembers, and it always calls for more. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.